Welcome to the Propertybuyer Podcast, where we explore the world of residential and commercial real estate to help you make better decisions about buying, selling, or investing in all types of property. Join me, Rich Harvey, CEO of propertybuyer.com.au and multi-award-winning buyer's advocate. Our podcast features expert interviews, market trends and insights, and practical tips for navigating the complex world of Australian real estate. Whether you're a home buyer, a seasoned property investor, commercial buyer, developer, or simply curious about the property market, our podcast is for you. Join us as we share our knowledge, strategies and experience and help you achieve your property goals. Welcome to our next edition of the Property Buyer Podcast. Sydney's inner west property market offers a kaleidoscope of diverse suburbs, each with its own unique character and price points. The beauty of the inner west is its close proximity to the city, its eclectic housing styles, from 150-year-old Balmain terraces, sweeping waterfront homes in Drummoyne or Birchgrove, and trendy apartments and townhouses in Newtown and Marrickville. The style of properties is equally matched by the diversity of people from all cultural backgrounds calling the inner west home. The abundance of fabulous eating places means you can eat your way around the world by visiting just a few suburbs. It's a part of Sydney that is highly sought after by property investors seeking to capitalise on consistently strong growth and solid rent returns. In this episode, we'll dissect the inner west's unique landscape, analysing trends shaping its future. We'll address many questions, including what's the outlook for 24? Are vendors still hesitant? What's going on with buyer sentiment? Which suburbs are hidden gems? So buckle up for some insights on pricing, demographics, negotiating strategies, and more. So to answer these many more questions, today I have Thomas McGlynn, CEO of Bressic, Whitney, with me. Thomas, great to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
So we have a tradition, and I'm going to throw you a thought of the week, and just like to get your perspectives on this, Thomas. And it is from Jim Rowan, who says, either you run the day or the day runs you. What do you take from that?
That's a great quote. I think, a lot of us go through life sometimes just in, automatic mode. I take from that, and one thing we talk with our team a lot about is, are you approaching your week in the way that you want to approach it, or are you just letting things come towards you and you're just dealing with them? So are you playing offense or are you playing defense with regards to your time? I guess I'm big on sporting analogies.
Especially with the Super Bowl this week.
Yeah, so that's sort of how I take that. I think that everyone, there's a lot of things in life that you cannot control, but there's a lot that you can. And, I think from that, it's about approaching your day and your week and your life in general with, the things that you can control and moving them in the right direction. So I love that quote from Jim Rowan.
Yeah. Well, I think time's a finite resource, right? And I've always been taught the concept of an ideal week. You've got the big rocks in your week, so it might be exercise or meeting with vendors or meeting with buyers, and then you put in the little rocks and then the sand and then the water, and you've got to fill it up. But the problem is we always have the tyranny of the urgent. Like, we're always going after the new shiny thing or the thing that grabs your attention. You've got to build what I call deep work into your life. That's something I've learned the last couple of years being a business owner and CEO. You've got to do that deep work and set aside time for it.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. So look, let's get into it. Tell me, how did you get into the real estate game and what was your first gig in real estate?
Well, I guess like a lot of people, you kind of get into the industry by chance. I mean, it wasn't that by chance. I'm third generation real estate agent, and certain parts of my family have been selling real estate for a very, very long time. So my family own a real estate business on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, and a really successful Century 21 business. And I just started uni and I thought I'd better get some business experience. So I approached Kerry and said, can I come and do some work with yourself and her partner Damien? And within the week, I found myself doing just sort of odd jobs for Damien and letterbox drops and all that different sort of stuff. So that was my first job. I was 18 at the time. Yeah,
fantastic. And I guess you've really stepped up in your game to become CEO. Like how many agents are there now in the whole Bressic Whitney team across the board?
We've got approximately 140 to 150, depending on contractors and so forth, people operating within the business, and I'd say about 65 to 70 of them are in the sales team.
Fantastic. And tell me the geographic boundaries of the business. Where do you cover? Where do you sort of draw the boundary lines?
Well, traditionally, so we're a 20-year-old business, and traditionally we'd sold within, say, 5 kilometre radius of the CBD. Areas such as the inner east, the real inner west. And in the past 5 to 6 years, we've really tried to broaden our horizons with that. And so, a big thing for us is we really want to concentrate on selling real estate within a sort of 10 to 15 kilometre radius of the CBD now, which encompasses the entire inner west, the entire eastern suburbs, the inner city marketplace, and then areas, across the Lower North Shore back into, Hunters Hill, Gladesville. So that's been something that's been a priority of ours over the course of the past 3 to 5 years, but we're only focused on Sydney real estate.
I've noticed, I've been doing this game 23 years, but I've noticed a real push into the Lower North Shore of late, which is great. You seem to be getting some traction in Hunters Hill, Gladesville, right into those right into the traditional areas there. So that's a pretty good strategy, right? Yeah,
it's pleasing because the one thing that you can see from the research is that it's more pronounced today than it ever has been before. I think COVID played a big part in this, is the traversing across the harbour front suburbs. I think that there's a lot of crossover of people travelling from the east to the inner west, between the Lower North Shore back to the inner west. People pushing further west out into places like Drummoyne, Russell Leigh, and into, say, Hunters Hill as their family grows. So strategically, I think it's something that, helps us grow, but it also helps with regards to getting the best outcomes for all of our clients, which is, it's pleasing.
It's great. So in your role, you're still actively auctioning, selling. I see your Instagram posts every week and getting some great results, but you're obviously in touch with the market, and I'd love to sort of tap into your perspectives on what you're seeing in terms of the mood of the market. But let's just go back to last year, 2023. How would you describe the state of the market last year? And then we'll look at this year in a minute.
Well, if I was to sum it up, I'd say surprising, because I don't think at the back end of 2022, and you'd know this, Rich, from all the work that you do, is that it was actually a very tough market coming into the back end of 2022. And there'd been some quite large declines with regards to property prices from the peak throughout COVID, and many people were predicting that to continue at the start of 2023, but the market really started very, very strongly. It was largely driven by the stamp duty reform that the Liberal government at the time had implemented, that's since not in place anymore, but that did push a lot of first home buyers into the market. And so I think that last year, by and large, many of the declines that people had experienced in property prices throughout 2022 were actually regained. And there wasn't a huge amount of economists that were predicting that, especially in the face of rapidly rising interest rate environment.
That was the interesting thing, right? I'm an economist by background as well, but there were few that actually picked it, but most of them were traditionalising their perspectives. But again, it comes down to supply and demand, the shortage of supply, and the massive migration in 2023. We just saw some significant increases despite the interest rate rises, right?
So I think 2023 was a very good marketplace for sellers, and that was very surprising. And for buyers that had bought in 2022, especially the back end of 22, they did really well with their capital gains, I would say, throughout 2023. So I think it was a very, very good, robust market.
Okay, so let's think about the year ahead. We're recording this in February 24. What's the outlook that you're seeing for both buyers and sellers in 2024? And are you seeing vendors still anxious or nervous about listing at the moment?
Well, there's definitely been an uptick in listings come to market. I know for us, we started off the year in January 30% up year on year for listing volume. And that's since risen to almost 45% for at least the first 8 weeks of this year. And a lot of people would say, okay, well, that means that we probably will see a flattening marketplace, maybe even a slight decline here and there, depending on the suburbs. But buyer inspection numbers are up 25%. So it does seem there's still a lot of people out there looking to buy. It's very difficult, I think, to predict early on because, as you know, Rich, there's some people that like to get out there early in the year just to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily genuine buyers looking to buy right now. My prediction for this year is that there's going to be some twists and turns, and a lot of the sentiment within the market does depend on, larger macroeconomic events and the people that are tied to those events and the comments that they make. For example, the Reserve Bank governor. And this has been a big shift. Yeah. People in my experience, say 5 to 10 years ago, would wait for information to come to hand, observe things for themselves, and then make decisions based upon that information. Now people are largely acting on speculation, not even the facts. So we saw that obviously with, the Reserve Bank governor many years ago saying we were going to have 4 years of historically low interest rates, and people did make decisions based
leveraged up, no interest rates till 2024.
And you can start to see that the language of the new Reserve Bank governor is, yes, inflation has come down, the retail figures were quite good, however, we cannot count out interest rate rises.
I use the word rhetoric, or jawboning. The Reserve Bank has got better at using their language that they use, and everyone's dissecting their statements to the nth degree. And that's why they left that line in there. We won't hesitate to raise interest rates if we think it's there. But like you say, a lot of people do act on that speculation, which is unfortunate rather than facts.
Yeah. So I think this year is going to be one of those years where there might be some great selling opportunities, but there also might be some great buying opportunities. And that's something that we haven't really experienced all that much, because in 2022, I believe it was firmly in the buyer's favour. 2023, it ended up being firmly in the seller's favour, and I think we're most likely going to see a marketplace where you might go see 10 auctions and half of them you say, wow, that was a very strong price for the owner, and another half you might say, I think that's actually a very fair price for the buyer. And that's an interesting dynamic for us to be in.
So you're kind of suggesting it could become a more balanced market, and I think you're right, because I think there's definitely going to be more listings. I mean, I'm always tracking distressed listings, or what they call motivated listings. Louis Christopher from SQM is obviously noticing a rise, but I'm not seeing blood on the street either. I'm not seeing lots and lots of foreclosures or anything like that, because people have had significant sums of money over the COVID period to actually pay down their loans. Now, all of those savings are not completely exhausted, but they're getting to a point where it's getting a lot tighter. And I'm hearing a lot of conversations in families and households saying, gee, our budget's tight, can we hold on to this property? So I think you'll see probably more motivated sellers, not necessarily distressed sellers. So that provides an opportunity for the buyers. But I think we always put an element of realism on those comments to say, don't expect to get a bargain, because there's going to be plenty of other buyers also competing for that same limited stock that's out there.
I agree with you, Rich. I think that the Sydney marketplace is so robust as a market. You only need to look at the last couple of periods of downturns, and anyone who didn't buy because they thought the market might run a little bit further down would probably have a lot of regret over their indecisiveness of not buying.
Exactly.
And you only need to study throughout the global financial crisis, many parts of Australia reduced by 50%. Whereas by and large, Sydney only really reduced by 7 to 10%. So if you're chasing a big discount, like you're saying, that's not a great strategy
not a good strategy
in the Sydney marketplace.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So I think a lot of people also to that point during COVID that really didn't pull the trigger are regretting it. I think there's going to be a wave of those buyers come into the market this year. I think there will be FOMO toward the end of the year. I mean, I think the first rate cut will probably come in July or August if inflation continues to trend down at the rate that it is. But once that first rate cut comes in, or once all the figures are showing that a rate cut's coming, you watch the market reignite. And we've still got massive migration, we've still got massive undersupply. Those two factors combined alone is going to drive and underpin the property market. I mean, some economists are saying the Sydney market will do about 5% conservatively. I think it's going to be 7 to 10 personally. But at the first 6 months of this year is what I call the window of opportunity. While cost of living pressures, finance is tight, I think for the buyer pool, that's the time to be jumping in. Not that there's a perfect time, but if you're trying to pick a window, the next 5-6 months is pretty good in my view.
No, I think they're good insights.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you a bit about the inner west. I mean, that's your sort of stamping ground, bread and butter. Tell me what you're seeing in terms of trends in the inner west market at the moment.
Yeah, the inner west market's really, really interesting because, I look back to, say, when the lockout laws in Sydney were implemented, and the inner east used to be the mecca for restaurants, cafes, and things that people like to enjoy with their Sydney lifestyle. And I'm not saying the inner west is, you mentioned earlier in the in your introduction with regards to your ability to be able to taste the world with different types of restaurants and cuisines and so forth, but the lockout laws really meant that entrepreneurial people that have hospitality businesses looked for different avenues and different places to invest and to open. The younger generation of entrepreneurs in the hospitality arena also were more moving to areas where there was value for rents and commercial and so forth. And that led to Marrickville being included in one of the most livable suburbs in the world in Time Out. It came from nowhere. And that's happened across the board. It's not just happened in Marrickville. Now, if you look at the brewery scene in many areas of Sydney, well, it's all centred around those areas at Marrickville in and around. So if you're thinking about someone wanting to go have a good time on a Saturday or Sunday, a lot of the time they're going to these areas. So that therefore has meant there's been a lot more editorial from big publications, newspapers, online journalism on a lot of inner west suburbs, and that has meant that it's been a lot more visible to people that potentially may not have journeyed out to the inner west from areas like the eastern suburbs and from areas like the Lower North Shore. And I think there's been a lot of new families look to buy in the inner west because of the value you get for the houses you can buy, the lifestyle you can get from the local cafes and restaurants. And I think schooling has also been something that a lot of people are identifying a lot of inner west schools, both public and private, as being a great place to be able to send their children for school. The other thing to think about with that too has been the rise of the trophy home in the inner west. And what I mean by that is that you have some beautiful, beautiful Victorian homes, new builds as well. And a lot of people over the past 5 years have invested architecturally into their homes. And a lot of these homes are now starting to come to light. And they're breaking new grounds with the prices that are being achieved. And, I do think the Inner West now does have a trophy home category, because you only need to look at some of the homes that have sold in Annandale, Balmain, Birchgrove, even into areas like Dulwich Hill, Summerhill, Marrickville. Big prices. So I think that shows that the Inner West has really gone through a bit of a transformative period.
Just on the trophy home, are people knocking down and rebuilding, or are they renovating grand Victorian terraces? What are you seeing in that department? Yeah,
both. I really do think it depends on the real estate, because in certain pockets you've got obviously homes that have, heritage features. That's difficult to obviously do.
You can't knock down
a lot to. You can't knock them down. But there's also brick homes in some of these areas you can knock down.
Yes.
So, but if you look at Annandale in particular, the homes that you have there are very, very similar to some of the homes that you might find across, say, Mossman or certain parts of the eastern suburbs.
Well, they're bigger blocks in Annandale, aren't they? That's the thing. I mean, Johnson Street's fantastic. It's wide, right? And it's got some stunning homes. And a lot of parts of, the other Inner West have 300 metre square blocks, and that's,
Exactly. And what we've noticed is that you've got a lot of professional people, lawyers, doctors, business owners, CEOs, executives, choosing to come to these areas because of the value they get for their investment is a lot. So that's something that I think, if you think about all of those things, it's a really exciting time, I think, to not only be an owner across the inner west, but to be a resident.
I find, I do a lot of travel in my business and seen a lot of changes over the years, but you're absolutely right. I've always found the inner west has got more of a vibe, a bit like the castle, it's the vibe of the thing, right? But it's kind of a more alive, The upper North Shore is kind of leafy and a little bit sedate, and I see a lot of, potentially older families downsizing and moving because they want the cafe lifestyle. They like that sort of, makes them feel younger, where it's a bit more things happening in the local market. But I'm curious to also ask you, what property types, you kind of touched on it, but what property types do you think are going to be in most demand the next couple of years in the inner west? Is it the really low maintenance townhouse? Is it the grand terrace that's been renovated? What do you think is going to be most in demand for the different buyer types?
I believe the homes that only 5 kilometres away, if you jump on the other side of the city, you're paying double.
Yes.
For.
Yeah.
I think.
So it's a great value proposition, is what you're telling me. Okay.
Yeah. I think those homes. Yeah. Now, they could be homes that do need quite a bit of work. That's been a big change that we've seen. 3 years ago, as construction costs became, a lot more expensive, people just did not want to touch renovation jobs.
Yep.
And there was, a lot of buyers looking to buy properties that didn't need any work done. That's changed now. So someone who's looking to buy, they go, well, why would I not consider going into, say, the inner west? When, let's just say, for example, Forest Lodge, even parts of Glebe. Now, I know that's the real inner fringes of the inner west. However, why would you not consider these marketplaces? Why would you not consider Toxteth Estate, for example, when you can get double the property for the same price compared to buying in maybe Darlinghurst or Paddington?
Yep. Makes a lot of sense.
The 5 kilometre travel time, and I don't know if that's enough to stop you from doing that, and that has happened. So I believe those properties are going to be the most popular. So it's probably those middle range, and we've already seen that to start this year with auctions. We're only really 2 weekends into proper auction territory. Yeah. And already seeing the middle range properties in the inner west are performing the strongest already.
There you go.
Already. So, and there's just a lot of value there, a lot of growth still there.
Excellent
to happen, I think.
Tell me about the buyers. Where are they coming from? Is it mostly buyers just moving within the inner west, or are you seeing a lot of buyers come from out of the area? And what sort of demographic are they?
Yeah, so I would say that you've got your traditional buyers that they grew up in the inner west, or when they've lived in city, they've always lived in the inner west, and they will make the decision to firstly buy a 2-bedroom apartment, upgrade that maybe to a smaller terrace or a smaller semi, and then they'll make that progression up to the family home. So you've got that, which has always been the case. But then you do have people coming from the eastern suburbs, and I know a lot of people don't believe that is a reality, but it is a reality. If you look at the major portals like Domain and realestate.com, and you look at where inquiries coming from, it's happening.
Interesting.
People are coming from the east, and they're looking at places.
Is that driven, do you think, by affordability, or they're just chasing that particular lifestyle in the inner west?
Firstly, I think it's affordability, but then once they spend more time, just like you said earlier, they spend more time in the inner west and they go, this is actually pretty good. Yeah. This is actually pretty good. And so that's happening a lot. We are seeing people, though, go from the inner west to then the lower North Shore. And that might be when their kids get to high school age. Yeah. And they've got traditions of where they want to go for their families, or if they want a bigger home, that you get a different type of home. Say, for example, you might go from the inner west to somewhere like Cremorne or to Mossman, for example. But by and large, I would say that buyers are coming to the inner west from the eastern suburbs and from the lower North Shore.
We really appreciate you tuning in to the Property Buyer Podcast, and I hope that you're finding our expert interviews helpful. So that we can keep providing this information and growing our audience, we rely on word of mouth recommendations. If you found this information useful, could I please ask you to share this podcast with your friends, family and colleagues, and ask them to subscribe to the Property Buyer Podcast. It would be a big help, and we'd be very grateful for your support. Thanks once again for sharing the links. And now, let's get back to the podcast. Excellent. Really good insights there. I want to ask you about pricing. Where are prices going, do you think? I want your crystal ball there, but maybe just give me a few examples at different price points. Tell me where you think pricing for apartments at the lower end of the market for the first home buyer or the investor might be getting in. Tell me where you think pricing for terraces, townhouses, and then talk about sort of the upper end, the trophy homes and the waterfronts. Can you give me a bit of a flavour on that?
Yeah, and it's actually a really good question because you're almost operating in a couple of different markets within a market there. The apartment market in general across Sydney, but in the inner west, it hasn't had the same growth as what houses have. And when I say houses, I mean terraces, freestanding houses, semis. It just hasn't. Yeah. For a number of different reasons. You've really only been dealing with owner-occupiers, and there hasn't been a huge amount of investors in the market in the last 2 years. You can see that with the shortage of investment properties. Yes. And many investment properties have been coming onto the market and then being bought by owner-occupiers.
Is that just on that? Is that an opportunity for the investor?
It's a huge opportunity.
Given the rents that they could command for those
it's a huge opportunity, especially because you can refinance, for example, once interest rates come down, and they will come down. Yeah. Whether or not it's this year or next year, they will come down. Yeah. So I actually think that's a very, very good opportunity. So apartments in particular, I think are providing an enormous value at the moment. Then if we then look at moving into, homes, I agree with what you said earlier, Rich. I think the first half of this year is going to, some buyers might think they're competing for properties, but that won't be anything compared to what it will be like if we see 1 or 2 interest rate drops this year. Now, I'm not going to pick it because I think there's so many things that can happen, so many variables that can happen. But let's just say from what you were saying, there is an interest rate drop in July or August. So before spring, I think we'll be in for a very, very strong spring for sellers. And so I think that the growth that we'll see this year will most likely occur at the back end of the year. Yes. And I do think that we could see growth similar to what we saw last year, if we're looking at the average, which is exactly what you said, 7 to 10%. Yeah. So, and then you have to look at the next category up, which is you start moving into, I don't say luxury because some people might not consider some of these homes luxurious, but they certainly are trophy homes. And I think that's a trend that's only going to continue to happen, and it's going to get a lot of air noise across editorial media, because each time one of these records is broken, it's like, wow, that happened.
Resets the precedent.
Now in the Lower North Shore and the eastern suburbs and out towards Hunters Hill and Lane Cove and these other type of areas, these big sales are not out of the norm. So they happen, people talk about them for a little bit, and then it's on to the next. When some of these big sales happen across the inner west, that's big news. And that only brings more attention to them and only makes it more normal that these prices are getting achieved. So I think you'll see actually, some good growth across that end of the market. It's always hard though to tell, how strong it is, because you're not dealing with like 100 sales. Yeah. You might be dealing with 10 to 15 big sales. So it's very difficult to ascertain and put that into, clarity.
Well, the turnover rate in that luxury, and upper end market is very low, and that's why there's such strong competition. That's why pricing is so strong. So other question for you, I just sort of want to delve into your, mode of operating and how you sort of do listings. How do you actually determine what price guide or what price a property should be sold for when you're actually signing up a vendor?
Yeah, and that's something that I don't think is an exact science, unfortunately. real estate doesn't come with a recommended retail price, and that is very difficult. I actually think for all parties that are involved in a transaction. And, you know, so for us, we really try and look at what has sold, what we know is coming up, because this is one thing as well, that if you're a localised agent that keeps your finger on the pulse, you should know also what is coming up.
Yes.
And that can determine whether or not your price guide is more or less in some instances.
Yep.
And the reason why I say that's important is that generally everyone's looking at the past to predict the guide for the future rather than what might be coming up. So it's a mixture. It's looking at what's sold, it's looking at seller motivation in terms of what they want out of the sale too, and it's also looking at what properties can we see coming onto the marketplace. And I think it's our job to provide that information and context to owners to help them understand where they should position their property in the marketplace. Because that, you know, you overprice a property, that can be detrimental to your sale, but equally as well, you could underprice a property and you might be attracting the wrong buyer.
It's a constant, I guess, pain or challenge for my buyers agents is they look at the guides and they go, that's rubbish, that's way underquoted. And obviously a lot of agents do it simply to attract attention and create that competition. So I guess that's a difficult task you've got in the sense that you might not know what it's going to go for at auction, but you've got to be within 10%. I mean, obviously, whatever someone puts on your agency agreement, you can't advertise a price higher or 10% higher or lower than that. But I see so many agents just typically still underquote, which is so frustrating for buyers out there.
The one thing that I get more frustrated with is the no price strategy, because what that basically is creating is an owner that might want a really high unrealistic figure.
Yes.
And no price just makes everyone assume that I'm a chance. And I think that's a bigger problem for the industry than the culture that is within some pockets of the industry of convincing an owner to go really low on a price. And the reason why I say that's a big challenge is because it's an easier conversation to have with an owner. To get agreement from an owner to put a fair price on an auction property is actually not an easy conversation.
I can imagine, because they've got lofty, if I'm a vendor, they've got lofty
and you're
expectations.
dealing with potential other
Yeah.
agents
Yeah.
who might have told an owner a very big price to try and
Win the listing. Exactly.
So I don't think there's an exact science on it. I do believe, though, having worked in a previous life across Australia, and looking at different ways that different people do it. I mean, in Queensland, it's actually against the legislation for you to even talk price with an owner, with a buyer.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, that makes it makes the cat and mouse game even harder in Queensland. It's ridiculous.
I find that very, very difficult, and you know, so it's not an exact science. I do think that there's areas that we can, you know, work on to get better at that, to make it better for you know, everyone that's involved in the transaction. But by and large, you know, we're looking at what's sold, what the current market conditions are, and what is coming.
I really like that. I haven't heard that before. That's a really good insight, I guess, for our listeners, from your perspective, for what's coming up. It's not just historical data. It's looking at that. It's looking at the mood and the economic conditions, the climatic conditions, and then what's coming up. I think that's excellent. So that's great. Another question, we'll just get off pricing and talk about value. You know the joke about economists, right? They know the price of everything and the value of nothing. But let's talk about value, because you could probably pinpoint a couple of suburbs to me that you might think are what I call undervalued. Like, I'm talking the hidden gems here. So for our audience, have you got any particular suburbs in the inner west you would go, you know what, that's got excellent potential for price growth? What would you say to that?
A lot of these suburbs, I actually think now are on the way to realising their value.
Yeah.
But a lot of the suburbs in across, say, the inner west, if we're staying on the inner west, village suburbs, Dulwich Hill, Summerhill, Petersham, Lewisham, I just think there is enormous value in these areas, and I truly do believe that suburbs that have a village and have a village community. You know, I think in the world that we're going into where, you know, people are feeling disconnected simply for the fact of social media, I think a lot of people are going to want to be living in village communities.
It's a really good point on that, because I've always loved Summerhill. I've actually, Dulwich Hill has been on my Hot 100 for many years. I do the REA Hot 100 frequently, but I like that. Petersham, Summerhill, they've got a really nice, just where the little local shops are, it's a place of congregation. It's a bit like the local pub, right? People come, it's a meeting place, and it's just got a great vibe.
You know, and I think that there are parts of Sydney that also have this, like Mossman, for example. Mossman Village has come alive since COVID, and if you go down there at the moment on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, it is vibrant.
Yeah.
But there are other areas that haven't done the same, and the inner west, I think, if you're looking at its strengths, has always had that village atmosphere. You go down to the local shop, you know who the business owner is, you know you're talking by name with people. I do think that is something that people really do value, and the types of properties that you can buy in these areas, I still believe, are really, really good value. So that's what I'd be looking at. I also just, if you're looking to invest and to, I think, have an opportunity for some good capital gains, I just think apartments across Sydney in general, not newer buildings, the older buildings. It just hasn't had the gap between the apartment prices and house prices has widened enormously since COVID. And at some point, people want to look to affordability, and there will be a shift back there. It might not be this year, but it could be in 2025.
Excellent point. Tell me about your experience in dealing with buyer's agents. I mean, a lot of your team would deal with people like myself. What's been that sort of interaction? How's the experience, and how does it differ from perhaps the ordinary buyer?
Well, obviously, you know, I find that buyers that engage a buyer's agent then tend to, you know, not let the emotive side of buying enter into as much, because that can be a good thing and a bad thing for a buyer. It could be a bad thing because you might end up paying a lot more than what you should for something, but it can also be a bad thing because you're so emotional and anxious about something. Your strategy might not be sound enough to secure a property. So we've got a philosophy at BW where we really like to work with buyers, but if we get to a point where we've got a buyer that, you know, really has missed out on 5 or 6 properties and they need some, you know, they need a lot more guidance and a lot more hands-on coaching around the process, we will always refer them to a buyer's agent. And, you know, I think that if you look at it from an auction perspective, the buyer's agent gives you the best opportunity to be able to buy at auction if you're not an experienced buyer, in my view, because the buyer's agent will probably employ a lot more aggressive strategy at the auction and will be a lot more decisive. And you may not win an auction, but you'll find out quicker whether or not you were an actual chance or not, rather than waiting back and then you know, being overwhelmed by the situation. So we really value our relationships with buyer's agents, and I've got to the point now, you know, where I actually, you know, thoroughly enjoy, you know, having good conversations with people like yourself, Rich, and, you know, at the end of the day, helping provide information that can help buyers.
Yeah, brilliant. Fantastic. Great to hear that experience. Talk me about, I guess, private treaty negotiation, different to an auction process. How do you approach the negotiation process with a potential buyer? And I guess on the flip side, how should the buyer approach you to get the best outcome as a sales agent?
Yeah, if we're talking, there's 2 parts to this. There's the negotiation that can happen prior to auction.
Yes, so I should mention it that way as
which
well, yes.
I think it's a very stressful situation for everyone, seller, buyer and agent. And then you've got obviously private treaty. It might be off market, it might be that it's just a set price. Different people approach these things differently. You know, we like to provide transparency and we like to give people opportunities. One of the biggest things that I get so disappointed by is if I hear someone say, but we didn't get a call back to get an opportunity to maybe increase our offer. we are not big fans of put your best offer forward by Friday at 5 o'clock. I just think that that's not a great outcome for all parties. And we like to be able to create a process where the buyers feel that if they want to increase, they get an opportunity to increase. Now, the trouble with that is...
you have a pseudo auction. You have an auction before the auction, right?
That's it.
And then the agent's on the phone ringing 10 potential buyers, and then you exhaust them until you get to that.
So what we would prefer to do is, and this is the benefit of BW having in-house auctioneers, not independent, is that I would prefer at that point if we have 2 to 3 people that all want to offer at the same price. The owner's willing to take that price, but we can't sort out who's going to be. We bring the auction forward and we create an auction environment. And even if it's just the buyers there, it doesn't need to be the neighbours, just the buyers. We'd prefer to do that. I think that it's counterintuitive for a buyer to make a very, very strong offer on a property that seems to probably have a little bit of interest very early on in the campaign, because you're going to most of the time end up in an auction before the auction that, even though the agent might be attempting to make it as transparent as possible, it doesn't feel that way, and it can be very, very stressful. If someone is thinking about, we would like to make an offer prior to auction, I would probably look to wait to see how I'd say to the agent, I just want you to know I am interested in this property. And I want you to know that if you are thinking about selling it prior to the auction, I want you to let me know. And then I would wait until probably the final week and a half leading into the auction to determine whether or not I feel there's a lot of interest on the property or not. And that's when I would make the offer, because that's something where you can then make a decision. Okay, they didn't take my offer. They want to continue to go to auction. I can then make a decision. Do I want to go to that auction at that point, or do I want to move on to something else? Because the agent will be a lot more in tune with being able to make the decision on whether or not it's going to go to auction, or whether or not we're going to treat it in a prior situation. So,
perfect.
But like anything, Rich, I think, sorry to cut you off, this is why I think, for a buyer that isn't experienced and doesn't have great relationships with the real estate agents, that's why employing a buyer's agent can be really beneficial.
What you just described is exactly what I do. You must have read my mind. But looking at that between that second, like most vendors need at least 2 weeks to test the market. And then, I don't know whether you do 4-week auction campaigns, but a lot of auction campaigns are 3 weeks now, depending on demand, depending on the market. But it's that between that second and third week, I will test the agent out and say, look, my buyer, I'll tell them, I'm interested. I absolutely need to be kept informed. My guys are ropeable if they don't get a call back. We had one the other day in the North Shore, first time ever. Matt and my team has been with me 16 years, didn't get a call back from the agent, and they sold it and undersold it. It was like, what the hell? The agent didn't do his job there, right? But we will always have a very frank conversation with the agent as to where our interest lies and whether we should actually force the auction prior or wait till auction and play our cards on auction day.
Yeah, because what could happen is, if you make a very big pre-auction offer in the first week or even the first 2 days, and yes, that offer actually might be what fair market value is, but an owner, even though they could be very, very logical with the way that they approach things, all of a sudden gets emotional because it's our biggest asset. If it's a property you've been living in, you're emotionally tied to it. All of a sudden you think, wow, if it's happened that quick,
then there must be 3 more people to make better offers.
Yes, and that becomes difficult to manage expectations. So I just think as a buyer you have to think about that. I can completely understand wanting to know whether or not I can buy this quite quickly.
Excellent. Really good tips there. A couple more questions for you. What do you love, or what's the most rewarding thing about being a selling agent for you?
I think it's the same thing. I'm still doing a lot of auctions. I'll still conduct 400 or 500 auctions a year, but I'm not day-to-day selling anymore, running a business. But I guess it's the same philosophy that I have with running a business is that the ability to be able to help people and to grow. We're very fortunate, I think, working in our industry that, one of the essential things that people need is a home. So I'm talking here whether or not you're dealing with someone who's looking to lease out a property or buy a property or sell. People need a home. It's a fundamental right, and we have a great opportunity to help people through that process, which can be a very stressful process. So, that's how I feel about our people in the business too. That if I'm helping them grow, and playing a part, that makes a big difference.
Awesome, love it. So tell me about PropTech AI. It's all the flavour of the year. What are you doing in your business to keep up with technology, and do you use any kind of AI in your business?
I think what's happened over the course of the last 5 years has been that PropTech sometimes, and the different companies that are out there, have actually complicated things a little bit. And I saw some research with relation to businesses that manage and lease out properties, so that have property management as part of their business, that since the introduction of a lot of PropTech companies that were supposed to make the businesses more efficient, the number of properties that a property manager can manage has actually gone up. Down, sorry. Right. So it's the opposite. So they haven't become more efficient. Right. So I think you'll be very, very careful with the things that you implement. A lot of the technology that's come into our industry, you then need to have a human that actually implements it really correctly. So I think you need to be very, very careful about that. However, for a business like us with AI, I think that is interesting because AI can now do things from a marketing point of view that can mean that properties are able to come to market quicker. And that's something that we're definitely exploring. And what I mean by that is that, generally if you decide that you're coming to market, you've got to get it photographed, you have to get it styled, you have to do a lot of things. And there's a lot of processes within that a physical human being has to make that happen. There are certain areas where you might actually be able to use AI to speed up that process. And that's something that we're definitely interested into because, as you know, Rich, the market can change in 3 weeks. So if you take 3 weeks to come to market, the conversation you have with an owner at the 1st of February might be different compared to the 1st of March. So speed to market actually is crucial. And we're also looking at a lot of different ways that just help us service people more efficiently.
Fantastic. 2 more questions for you. What has been, I guess, your most memorable, interesting or intriguing sale that you've been part of?
There's been a lot in my time. I think that I don't really have, every different property has its its benefits and its different highlights for what we experience selling them. But we've had the pleasure of selling some really good homes. I think it was very, very interesting throughout the course of COVID when we basically went offline and were conducting auctions on Zooms or through other platforms like Realtor and so forth.
I remember just my little sticky note, bit of number 3, holding it up in front of the camera.
Yeah, so I think that was an experience because it meant that as an auctioneer, for example, I had to move away from question-based auctioneering, which a lot of the time is what I'm doing, asking people, testing people, to more statement-based auctioneering, where you're trying to put a statement out there that gets people thinking differently because you're not really getting as much interaction and feedback. Yeah. So that was I think a very interesting time. There's been some really, really good sales. We recently sold a property in Seaforth, and that sold for just under $12 million. And for us as a business, that was a big milestone sale because as we'd mentioned at the start of the podcast, we traditionally had been not in that area, not really selling that category of property. And we've really tried to move into the $5 to $15 million category in recent times, and that I think that was a memorable sale.
Fantastic. Well, my last question for you, just briefly, what would be your best property tip that you can share with our audience today?
And this is one that I've had to convince myself. I think part of the problem of being in the industry is you start thinking about timing the market. you'd know about this.
Absolutely.
And especially if you've got a mind where you like listening to what's happening with the Reserve Bank, what's happening in the economy. My biggest thing is, time in market, don't time the market. I know a lot of people do say that. And I do believe in different areas of Australia you can look at this slightly differently, but in Sydney, by and large, we are an international city. Real estate is viewed really intensely as an asset class. And I think that you've got to really have time in the market.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Yeah. No, totally agree with that. I think a lot of people try to, they procrastinate, they delay, they overanalyze, and they miss out on so many opportunities because they're trying to time it. But as you say,
I've personally been through it.
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to buy property at the start of COVID when things were down, and I didn't, because I thought, no, things are going to go down a little bit more, and I had analysis paralysis, and I overanalyzed things, and I didn't buy it. That same property you could have bought for 2.4, then was selling in 2023 for 4.3.
Wow, there you go. Opportunity cost right there, folks.
Right. So now, I'm not saying that I'm doing bad by any means, but I think that even for those of us in the industry, we sometimes overanalyze things.
Well, it's good to get an objective view. I mean, that's why we have a business too. But I always say to people, if you've got borrowing capacity, use it. Otherwise, it's gone. I mean, some years you might have a great year, sometimes you might have a bad year, depending on your salary or commissions or whatever. But if you've got borrowing capacity, borrow safely, get into the market, and you'll be thanking yourself for many years to come. Well, look, Thomas, thank you so much. There were some awesome tips in today's podcast. I really appreciate you spending the time with me today. And really wish you all the best for the year ahead. Thanks, Thomas.
You too, Rich. Thank you very much for having me.
So thanks again for joining us on another edition of the Property Buyer Podcast. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. We'd love to help you, and we look forward to engaging with you on another edition of the Property Buyer Podcast. Bye for now. Thanks for being with us on another Property Buyer Podcast. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please click on the SpeakPipe link and we'll answer this during the next episode. If you're looking to buy a residential or commercial property in the near future and would like to get the added advantage of having a buyer's advocate on your side, then please reach out to my team today and send us your inquiry, and we'd be delighted to help. Please visit our website at propertybuyer.com.au, where you can stay updated with all my latest market updates, weekly blogs and live suburb profiles to help you make better property decisions. We look forward to connecting with you again on the next Property Buyer Podcast.